The rain had no mercy that night. It wasn't the soft romantic rain people wrote poems about. It was heavy. Ruthless. Cold. The kind that soaked through concrete, through skin, through pride. Alexander Grayson's Rolls-Royce Phantom glided to a stop outside his private residence, a glass-and-steel mansion overlooking the city he practically owned. At 41, Alexander was a legend. A self-made millionaire CEO. A man newspapers called untouchable. A man employees feared and investors worshipped. But as he sat inside the silent car, hands resting loosely on the steering wheel, Alexander felt empty. No excitement. No joy. Just exhaustion. Another merger completed. Another rival crushed. Another victory that tasted like dust. The driver stepped out, opened the door, and left silently, as instructed. Alexander preferred being alone after midnight. He stepped into the rain. Water instantly darkened his custom Italian suit. Worth more than some people's yearly income. He didn't notice. As he reached into his pocket for his phone, a sound stopped him cold. At first, it barely registered. A faint noise. Almost swallowed by the rain. He tilted his head. There it was again. A cry. Not loud. Not angry. Weak. Broken. Alexander frowned. His first thought was irritation. Great. Some stray animal. But the sound wasn't animal. It was human. No smaller. A baby. His heartbeat quickened. That's impossible, he muttered. He took a step closer to the car. The crying grew clearer. Lower. Closer. His breath caught when he realized the direction. From under the Rolls-Royce. Every instinct screamed at him to call security. To step back. To let someone else deal with it. That instinct had built his empire. But something else, something old and buried, forced his body to move. Alexander slowly bent down. Rainwater soaked into his knees. His $5,000 shoes sank into a shallow puddle. And then he saw her. A woman. Curled tightly against the cold concrete. Hair plastered to her face. Arms locked around a tiny bundle shaking violently. Two eyes looked up at him, eyes filled with terror, shame, and exhaustion. Please, she whispered before he could speak. Please don't call the police. The baby cried again, a thin, rasping sound. Alexander's chest tightened. He had fired grown men without emotion. But this? This knocked the breath out of him. How long have you been here? He asked, his voice unexpectedly rough. She hesitated. Since sunset. Why under my car? The metal blocks the wind, she said quietly. It was warmer than the street. The baby coughed deep, painful. Alexander felt something crack inside him. He crouched lower. For the first time, he truly looked. The child was tiny. Too tiny. Skin flushed with fever. Lips slightly blue. That color haunted him. Because he had seen it before. In a reflection. In a mirror. In a 6-year-old boy shivering in a foster home, crying softly so no one would get angry. Alexander straightened abruptly, breath unsteady. What's his name? He asked. Eli, she whispered. Please. I know we're not supposed to be here. He took off his coat without thinking. The same coat executives had complimented earlier that night. He slid it gently around the baby. The woman gasped. Sir. Come out, Alexander said softly. You're freezing. She shook her head. They always chase us away. His jaw tightened. I'm not they. Slowly, painfully, she crawled out from under the car, never letting go of the child. Up close, she looked even worse. Sunken cheeks. Cracked lips. hands trembling from cold and fear. "I'm Alexander," he said. "We're going to the hospital." "I can't afford." "I didn't ask," he interrupted gently. For the first time in years, money didn't feel like power. It felt like responsibility. As he opened the car door and helped her inside, Alexander didn't know it yet. But that cry under his Rolls-Royce had just ended the life he knew. The waiting room where time stopped. The hospital doors slid open with a sharp hiss. Bright white light spilled out, almost blinding after the darkness and rain outside. Alexander stepped in first, instinctively shielding the woman and the baby behind him, as if the world itself might still try to harm them. "Emergency," he said firmly to the nurse. "The baby's breathing is weak." The nurse took one look at the child and called for help. Everything happened fast after that. Too fast. Hands reached out. The baby was lifted from the woman's arms. Machines beeped. A small body disappeared behind swinging doors. And suddenly, silence. The woman collapsed into a chair like her bones had forgotten how to hold her up. Alexander stood there, rainwater dripping from his hair onto the polished floor, feeling completely useless. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. "Lena," she said, barely audible. "How old is he?" 8 months. Alexander nodded, swallowing hard. 8 months. 8 months of protecting a life while the world tried to crush you. They sat. Minutes passed. Then hours. The ticking of the clock on the wall felt louder than any boardroom argument Alexander had ever been in. Lena stared at the floor, rocking slightly back and forth. "He's all I have," she whispered suddenly. "After my husband died, he's the only reason I wake up." Alexander turned to her. "How did this happen?" he asked gently. She hesitated, then laughed bitterly. "How much time do you have?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Lena's story. "We weren't poor," Lena began. "Not rich. Just normal." Her husband, Daniel, had been a delivery driver. Honest. Hardworking. Tired in the evenings but always smiling when he came home. Then one night, a drunk driver ran a red light. Daniel never made it home. The compensation barely covered the funeral. Medical bills followed, stress complications during pregnancy, hospital stays, medication. "I tried," Lena said, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. "I really tried. 2 jobs. Then 1. Then none. Rent overdue. Eviction notice. Friends who stopped answering calls. Shelters full. People who looked at her baby and said, 'Not our problem.'" Alexander listened, something heavy settling in his chest. He had always believed failure was a choice. Now he saw how wrong he'd been. "It only takes one bad moment," Lena continued, voice shaking. "One accident. And everything collapses." Alexander looked at the closed emergency doors. He thought of his own childhood. Of being passed from house to house like unwanted furniture. Of learning early that crying didn't bring comfort, it brought punishment. So he stopped crying. And became someone the world couldn't ignore. But the cost. The doors finally opened. The doctor stepped out. Alexander stood so fast his chair tipped over. "How is he?" Lena whispered, terrified. The doctor took a breath. "He has pneumonia," he said. "Severe. If you'd stayed outside another hour, he wouldn't have survived." Lena sobbed, her whole body folding inward. Alexander felt his knees weaken. "But," the doctor continued, "he's stable now. We're keeping him under observation." Lena covered her face, crying openly now. Alexander didn't think. He put a hand on her shoulder. And for the first time in decades, he felt something dangerous. Relief. The night that changed him. They allowed Lena to see the baby. Alexander stood quietly at the back of the room as Lena sat beside the small hospital bed. Tiny chest rising. Falling. Machines hummed softly, like guardians standing watch. "He's so small," Alexander murmured. "But so strong," Lena replied, brushing her finger gently across the baby's hand. The baby's fingers curled around hers. Around Alexander's too, when he dared to offer one. That grip. It broke him. Memories crashed back without warning. A thin blanket. A cold room. A child's hand reaching out, and no one taking it. Alexander turned away, blinking hard. He hadn't cried since he was a boy. That night, alone in the hospital hallway, he did. Silently. Ashamed. Relieved. Alive. The man who stopped going home. Alexander didn't return to his mansion that night. Or the next. He stayed. He brought clean clothes for Lena. Food. Toys for the baby. But he didn't make announcements. Didn't call the press. Didn't tell his assistants. For once, he did something without wanting credit. Each day, he learned something new. How Lena flinched when voices rose. How she apologized too much. How she thanked him like she expected the kindness to disappear. And each night, Alexander sat by the window, staring at the city. All that money. All that power. Yet the most important thing in the world was happening in a small hospital room. One fragile breath at a time. One evening, Lena asked quietly, "Why are you doing this?" Alexander didn't answer immediately. Then he said the truth. "Because once, someone should have done this for me." The first crack in the empire. When Alexander finally returned to work, everything felt wrong. The boardroom felt colder. The conversations felt hollow. Profit charts meant nothing compared to the sound of a baby breathing normally again. During a meeting, an executive joked about cutting healthcare benefits to save costs. Alexander stood up. The room froze. "No," he said. The word echoed. "We're not doing that." The executive stared. "This company exists because people work for it," Alexander continued. Not the other way around. They didn't recognize this man. Neither did he. That night, Alexander stood on his penthouse balcony, looking down at the streets. Rain had stopped. But he knew now. There were still people out there, crying quietly, hoping someone would listen. And for the first time in his life, he intended to be that person.